All right, Lynn, you're all set.
Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to National Distance Learning Week with SUNY Online. My name is Lin Lin. I'm a graduate student intern with SUNY Online and also an instructor at the University of Albany. So it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session and to introduce our speaker, Dan Barrancotta. EDD. He's an educator and instructional designer with experience in workforce development, K-12, and higher education. So Dan currently serves as an instructor at Western Governor University in the Education Technology and Instructional Design graduate program, and also an adjunct instructor at SUNY Genesee Community College, Niagara University, and Brian Stratton College. Dan's teaching philosophy is centered around transformative leadership and the belief that every learner is unique and brings valuable knowledge and experience with them that can benefit the group. He seeks to develop diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning experience that foster classroom community where all learners can learn with and from each other to accomplish their goals and drive change in the workforce. So Dan lives in Western New York with his wife and two young daughters. Welcome, Dan, to join our session.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you all for being here and joining us and kicking off this National Distance Learning Week. And I think this is, it's always good to see folks here and attending and looking to learn and grow a little bit. And I'm happy to see that and happy to be a part of this. So we'll get started and we'll jump right in here to the presentation and going over some information. But I did want to make sure that we do have some time at the end for, just a further conversation and questions and answers. So we will have that time at the end. But as we go, please don't hesitate to put anything in the chat to let me know. And if there's anything that comes up that I can explain a little bit further as it's relevant, certainly feel free to do that. And I'll do my best to keep an eye out for that. My get started here myself. I've already done the intro. I just like to always throw up the picture so I get a chance to show off my girls there. That's Gianna. She's the baby. She'll be 8 months in about a week. And then Ariana's the big sister there. She's about 3.5, and my wife Alexa. So always a chance to brag. I like to do that. But as we get started here in talking about the idea of using feedback as a tool for growth, I think it's important to just think about holistically what we're trying to accomplish and what we're ultimately trying to do here. So think big picture as we go through this. And I really love this quote by John Hattie. Feedback is one of the most powerful influences on learning when there is a learning purpose behind it. And I think that's what we really want to make sure that we're thinking about and that we're doing. When we're thinking of designing learning experiences for folks, when we're thinking about creating assessments and fostering engaging atmospheres for learning, that's what we really want to be doing, right? We want to have a purpose, we want to have an alignment, and ultimately what we're seeking to do is to bring our students along with us on this learning journey. And feedback is often an overlooked piece of that puzzle, but it's something that I think can really build connections and fill in some blanks there if we're looking at it, with that idea to influence learning and with a purpose behind it, not just something that we have to do for our students, but something that we get to do for our students. And it's important, I think, to recognize that, feedback helps us learn every day in life and everything that we're doing. Certainly in the classroom, regardless of modality, feedback can be a powerful tool for learning. But think of all the feedback systems around us as we go. The feedback that we can get, everything from, our phones and the way we're always constantly connected and getting information, the feedback we get when we cook a meal at night with our families, or the feedback that we get from our vehicles when we get in the car and start it, and it lets us know if, we need to check the engine or things like that. Feedback is all around us, and feedback helps us to continue to keep things into perspective, to continue to gain important information and allow us to ultimately be successful, in whatever we're doing. And we want to keep that mindset and keep thinking about that as we're thinking about education as well. And the idea here, I think that really helps to focus that mindset and to keep that mindset is our focus and goal is to continue to teach through feedback. So when we get to an opportunity to give an assessment, and there's lots of different types of assessments and strategies and methods for those assessments, and we won't get into all that today. But I think it's always important that even on our summative assessments that we do, generally speaking, when we're done with the teaching and we're asking students to summarize their learning, that the assessment itself, that act that the student takes, whether it's taking a multiple choice test or writing an essay or completing a project, that should never be the end of the learning process. Feedback is an opportunity to continue that learning process, to continue to teach our students through feedback. Um, and it really allows us to extend that instructional period. And often this is an opportunity when we can be the most efficient with our teaching, and our students will get the most information from us about what they need to learn and where they need to make improvement. So, when there's a grade sort of associated with something, and they want to know why or how they got that grade, we've got them hooked and sort of engaged. Let's take that moment to provide some feedback that can help continue to teach them. Because every feedback comment, every feedback opportunity is a way that we can teach sort of again, what maybe was missed, where are those weaknesses, and how can we continue to promote that idea of growth mindset, which we'll get into as we go today. But we want our students to continue to grow and to learn through this opportunity, and through this assessment. And it helps students, really do things like revisit concepts that maybe that they missed or they need a little bit more work on, more clearly see an application to the things that we've been talking about, what we've been trying to teach them and how we want them to go about learning that. And also it helps us to again, with that level of engagement with students, when we're giving them feedback on an assignment, we usually have them sort of hooked for that moment where they're interested in what we have to say. How can we sort of help them internalize the overall learning goals and objectives of a course or an assignment to try to connect those ideas in meaningful ways that will help them sort of retain and transfer that knowledge and that important information forward into the next concept, the next activity, the next assessment, and all of those things. We also want to make sure that, when we're aligning that feedback, that we're continuing to teach, right? We're continuing to show this is how we can progress through and move towards those learning goals and objectives. These are the key concepts and ideas that we covered and why we're going to need them moving forward, how we can sort of start to build, with foreshadowing and connections to what we're going to learn next as often as possible as well. And when we set this up, what we allow for an opportunity is to sort of, get into and continue this idea of a feedback loop. So, what we're doing, when we give an assessment and a student completes that assessment, that's their opportunity to provide essentially feedback to us of what their learning was, right? We're able to assess their learning, their knowledge, their skills, their abilities as it relates to those learning goals and objectives with their first submission or completion of the work. So we're getting some feedback from them about where they're at. Now, how can we get in there and provide some feedback to, based on that, to individualize our instruction, right? Every student is going to perform a little bit different and is at a different place. Can we individualize the way we're teaching? When we're identifying strengths and weaknesses, we can differentiate that instruction to provide for each student what they need to continue to promote their learning and to promote, the ultimate success of the student as it relates to those learning goals and objectives. And what can we do with feedback? What's sort of the ultimate purpose of feedback? I think we want to make sure, right, we're keeping this in mind as we're providing feedback. We're thinking about what it can allow us to do. And feedback is really more than just a grade, right? We don't want to just give a student an A or a B or a 90 or a 70. But we have an opportunity here with feedback to support our learners. And when we say support our learners, how can we continue to build them up? How can we continue to help them through this educational experience, doing things like, building confidence, recognizing their achievements, and just overall improving and enhancing the experience that they have within our particular course, is important. And this helps us with that engagement. It helps us with retention. It helps us to keep students moving forward and tracking towards that success, and which helps to allow us to, again, the next sort of purpose here, ultimately to improve performance. Again, that idea of continuing to teach through feedback here, we have an activity, we have an assignment, we have a test, we have that assessment that a student did. How can we continue to teach? How can we help improve the student performance here? Where are there errors that we can correct and sort of reteach? What types of information or resources could we provide to students here that will give them the information, towards how to improve? So not just, hey, this is your score. Clearly, we need improvement here, but this is what you're going to do next to improve. And we can also use feedback to maintain a level of development and accountability within assessments and within a course as well. So I think this goes a long way for students when they see not just that this was a grade that may appear to them was sort of pulled out of thin air. Now, that's not to insinuate that anybody's just pulling grades out of thin air, but if we're not providing clear feedback, there might be a disconnect in, okay, I got a B, but what was good about this that got me up to a B? But what was maybe not quite good enough about this to get me into that A level. So, the feedback clarifies, again, strengths, weaknesses, areas of improvement, things that we can do better and differently next time, but also keeps things, direct and accountable and developmental in the sense that this is what we're going to do. This is why we got to this grade. And when we can align that feedback to those learning outcomes, that helps us continue to track towards, that overall course success, and student success. Is, we've got this particular assessment, but how is this going to relate to those big goals and objectives that we have here at this time? We want to continue to develop our learners to get there. Even if they're not there right now, how can we get them there? What can we do? Feedback gives us a chance to help support that process. And really, in order to do this, we want to, maintain the idea here that a purpose is important for effective feedback. We want our feedback to be effective. We want it to be meaningful and useful to our students. So, why are we doing this? Why are we saying what we're about to say? These are things that we want to think about when we're providing that feedback. So, as we're getting ready to put that feedback together, some things to think about or ask ourselves. Am I focusing on learning here, not just their performance? So, the performance on the assessment is important, but we're not just talking about how the learner performed. We want to talk about how can they learn? How can they continue to be a learner here? How can they seek that improvement, and do things better the next time and connect these ideas and things they're doing well to continue to promote sort of growth there? And then what do we want our learners to do next? And I think that's an important thing that again is often overlooked. Even when students do really well on an assessment, what do we want them to do next? Is there a way that we can challenge them to continue to learn? Are there important things that we might want to get them thinking about, sort of for those maybe real world transferable skills, or application of the knowledge that we just assessed? How can we connect this to what we're going to be doing next, the next unit, the next module, the next class, the career that the students are headed into? There's always those opportunities here to build connection to what's coming forward in the future as well. And ultimately, we want to think about how can we help our students grow here. And again, there might be different levels to that students need and what their performance indicates. Do they need to grow up to the point where they can, demonstrate competency and mastery of the material here for this course? Or are they ready to grow and improve and think about their futures? And when we provide this feedback, we want it to be purposeful and we want it to do just that. What can we do next? And when we're fostering a growth mindset, I think we're allowing our students to do and see that. We're allowing them to think about, okay, this is sort of where I'm at. This is what I can do to improve. And this is how I'm going to grow as a result of this assessment and my reflection on this assessment, which is an important piece of this as well. And when we say growth mindset, what are we looking for there? I've mentioned that a couple times, and I think it's important to just kind of think about the idea of growth mindset and what we see sort of in the research that's out there on growth mindset. We can have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset, we're kind of closed off. And we're not able to sort of accept this feedback or to rethink things and continue to grow. But when we can foster a growth mindset, which is something that I think we can do, we can get our students thinking about their ability to continue to grow. We're able to do that and help build towards improved learning goals and outcomes as well. So the idea of fostering that growth mindset gives us a chance to have our students continue to stay engaged, and continue to see, even their struggles and their difficulties as an opportunity for learning. And that's what we want to see here. We want to focus in on, really emphasizing the ideas of effort and the effort that a student's giving. And even if they're not there yet, that they can get there, that we're not just closing them off, that this is the end of the road here for your learning because this is the assessment and you didn't do well, so we're sort of done. We want to focus on, okay, this is where you're at, this is what you've done, this is what we need to do to improve and move forward. And we're providing students with strategies to help with that. That's the idea here. If we want students to grow from this, how can they grow from this? And why is it important that they grow through this? And how can we sort of develop that idea of persistence and grit in moving forward for our students in this? And one of the ways we can do that is the idea of avoiding labeling. So not just saying things like you're a natural or great job or you're so smart, but we focus on the process. And that's something that we'll talk a little bit more about, the idea of the process. But I think in general, when we're sort of more focused on the process that we take and less focused, on the outcome, we tended to get ourselves there. We're not so focused on I've got to get an A, but we're focused on how do I learn this material? And that's the idea of growth mindset. What can I do? What are my controllables here to get in there and to do the work that will ultimately pay off in the end? I'm focusing on the process and the steps that I'm taking. And if I trust that process, the results are going to take care of themselves. And that's what we really ultimately, I think, want for our students is to focus on that process, and those results will find will take care of themselves. So there's ways to do that and to help with that idea. And that's what we want to think about through our feedback. And we'll go over a few examples of that shortly. And when we're doing this and when we foster this growth mindset, we have that feedback loop that I mentioned. That's that conversation. It's not that we're done, but we're continuing to grow and learn and provide opportunities for that. And when our students start to become more comfortable with that in our courses, it gives them an opportunity to sort of, desire that feedback and accept that feedback and think about it as, okay, this is going to be really good information that's going to help me grow. It's going to help me improve. It's not to put me down. It's not to criticize me. It's not just pointing out my weaknesses. They're not angry at me and they're not saying I can't do this, but this is how I'm going to learn. This is what I need to know to be successful as we move forward here. The idea of characteristics of quality feedback, and I apologize, my title of the slide's not popping up here on the screen, should be characteristics of quality feedback. That's something that we want to make sure that we're doing and displaying here, that we're continuing to teach through feedback when we provide very clear connected characteristics of good quality feedback. And in all of the feedback that we provide, we want to be quality. And what will make it quality feedback is if it is specific, actionable, and timely. And that idea is here, we want our feedback to always be specific. We want to be very clear and specific to our learners about what they need to improve on. That we're mentioning here very clearly where issues are and where there's room for that growth and improvement. We want to be actionable. And when we're being actionable here, we're telling our learners how they can improve. This is an action that the student or the learner can take to improve. We identified that area of weakness. Here's how we can turn that area of weakness into a strength. And we want our feedback to be timely. The sooner we get our feedback to our students, the more effective it's going to be. And that's for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, if I ask everybody what they had for breakfast yesterday, you probably have a good chance of remembering that and sharing that. But if I ask you what you had on October 1st, probably no chance that anybody can tell us that unless you have pretty much the exact same thing every day, right? But the idea is our brains can only remember and retain so much information. And then even if we think about, things that we do when it's more recent, it's more easy to reflect on that. The idea of metacognition, sort of thinking about our thinking there. So I know I did this, and this is why I did that. I took a different route to work yesterday, and I did that because there was an accident. And I remember that today, but will I remember that in a year, or in a month or in a week? So the sooner we get things back to our students, the more they can build those connections to this is why I did what I did, why I completed this assignment in the way that I did. And also, we want feedback to go back to students in a very timely manner because we want to correct those mistakes or issues right away so that we can allow for students to get on the right track and avoid sort of thinking or feeling like they're doing something correct or they know something or they've got this down when really there's something off there. And that can allow students to sort of, the longer they move forward with the idea that they're doing something the right, maybe the harder it is to sort of break from that habit or from that idea as well. And then hopefully in our classes, we're having students continue to learn and continue to complete assignments and activities throughout this process. And if we don't get feedback soon, we're missing that opportunity to help connect and build towards the next assessment. And, maybe if it's something that a student's doing that we don't like here, the way that they're, formatting their discussion board post or their paper, and we know there's another one coming up, let's get that feedback to them before that next one is due so they can make that correction and not make that same mistake on the next submission as well. And when we're giving feedback, we want it to be quality feedback, specific, actionable, and timely. But we also want to be aware, I think, of, again, that idea of the sort of the purpose of feedback and how can we give feedback at appropriate levels. So, in instructional design here, we have different levels of feedback that we want to think about and provide to our students. And, there's a time and a place for all of these things, and they can all support ultimately our learners, which is what we're trying to do. So we want to provide feedback that's at that task level. When we think task level feedback, we're thinking and focusing in on the specific task that was given to a student or learner. And, what did they do? Did they answer a multiple choice question or write an essay or complete a project? How did they do on that? Let's correct any errors that are there. We're identifying, again, the strengths and weaknesses sort of the output of the student and the way what they did for that task and the way they performed on that task. So these are things like, you got this right, you got this wrong, you need to do this better. Process level feedback is an important piece of feedback, an important level here, because this is going to, again, sort of focus on that idea of a growth mindset and an idea of what process is the learner going to take when they're completing these tasks. So, if students are writing an essay, we can give specific task level feedback on a mistake that they wrote, on that essay. Maybe they didn't include a strong thesis statement. So then our process level feedback gets into how are we going to grow from that? We've identified that specific task that needs to improve the thesis statement. Let's think about that process that unfolds to develop that thesis statement. Can we give some feedback on that? What's that action that the student can take to improve their process and ultimately improve their thesis statement for the next assignment or essay that they're going to put forth? And then we have regulatory, or sometimes also referred to as self-regulation level feedback. And this is the type of feedback that we give our students that helps promote sort of autonomy here and the idea of self-monitoring throughout. How can the student, think about what they're doing and check their work really before they put it forward? How can they guide themselves through this assessment process and completion of their work? How can we get in there and give them some information and resources and some things to think about along the way to make sure they're staying on track and sort of within the guidelines of the content and the assessment as well? And then self-level feedback here is the last one we'll mention. And self-level feedback really focuses on sort of that internal self. And self-level feedback isn't necessarily, quality feedback in the sense that this is what's going to help you learn. It's not promoting student learning here, but what it is it's really important that we're sort of working on that engagement and that motivation of our learners. We can't afford to have students give up. When they give up, that's when they stop learning, their performance suffers, retention ultimately declines. We need to, again, like I mentioned, foster that growth mindset, the idea of grit and perseverance. And self-level feedback allows us to do that. And this also helps us sort of build those connections and it helps us build those relationships with our students as well. So that self-level feedback is the thing like identifying and recognizing that a student's working really hard. providing them with a confidence builder or boost that, hey, I trust you, I believe you, I know you can do this. I appreciate what you're doing. All this hard work is going to pay off. Again, it's not focused on the content, but sometimes hearing that is enough to dive back into the content and to keep working and learning. And we also want to make sure that our feedback is well aligned. So when we think about alignment, that's a really important piece of designing instruction and learning experiences in everything that we're doing. And feedback is no different. So when we're giving feedback to our students, we want to ask ourselves, I think the most effective feedback is well-aligned feedback, and we want to think about and ask ourselves, is this feedback that I'm providing aligned? And if it is, that's helping us accomplish a lot of those goals and things that we've been talking about. So can we align the feedback that we're giving students to the learning outcomes? These are the goals and the objectives, the outcomes for this particular course or unit. I want to give feedback that's going to help our students reach and achieve those goals. I'm connecting the feedback on this activity back to that big idea, that learning goal or objective. We want our feedback to be very specific to the assessment as well. So it's not just generalized, broad level feedback, but very clearly, again, that idea of this is the grade and here's why. This is what you did well. This is maybe what you struggled with. We're lining it up specific parts of the assessment and being very clear there. And then when we have that actionable feedback, we can align it to those teaching and learning activities. We're continuing to teach through feedback. When we recognize that a student missed a question or missed on a particular topic, can we sort of point them back to the coursework, a chapter in the book, a particular lecture or video that was given, a particular idea or resource that we had shared previously with the intention of teaching the student on that. Now they missed that. Can we point them back to that so they're thinking back, okay, this is where I was taught this. This is the learning activity. This is how I need to learn and connect these ideas to ultimately perform better on assessments and retain this information moving forward. And this slide just gives us a whole bunch of examples here, a lot of words on this slide, and I apologize for that. But I think it's important just to kind of think about and see sometimes some examples. And the idea of, when we give feedback, we want it to be quality feedback. It's specific, it's actionable, it's timely. We want it to sort of fall within the appropriate levels of feedback, but also the idea of how can we use our feedback to feed up, to feed back, and to feed forward. And that's the idea of what can we do? What are we trying to accomplish with this feedback, and how can it ultimately promote student learning? We're being very intentional with our feedback here, and that's what we want to do is always, again, think about those key questions that we talked about at the beginning with feedback and how that provides us with an opportunity to promote student learning and continue to teach through these assessments. So again, when we're giving that task level feedback, we're focusing it on the learner's specific performance here, and being very clear about what they're doing well and what they're struggling with. When we're thinking process, that overall process, how does the student work through the completion of this task or assignment? Are there things that we can help them that will put them in a better position to be successful the next time? That idea of self-regulation or regulatory level feedback, allowing students to sort of monitor their own actions and help themselves. Can we help our student help themselves? Because we want them ultimately to be able to do this moving forward when they might not get feedback. They might be doing it in the real world, and that's when we want to make sure they're doing it correctly. And again, that idea of self-level feedback, we're aiming it at the person, the student. We're not necessarily helping them get better on the content, but we're letting them know that they can do this. We're fostering that idea of the growth mindset here, getting our students engaged and motivated and to continue their learning through this process. Uh, I just also want to give a quick plug here for the SUNY CPD Instructional Design Certificate Program, which is something that I work with, and it's I think a really great course for anyone that's an instructional designer or teaching, whether it's students as a faculty perspective. We've got a lot of folks that are assessment designers and librarians and some folks in different roles. Whenever you're putting together teaching and learning, this is a really good program, I think, if you're interested in learning more about some of the things we talked about today. We dive into it to feedback very deeply in that program. It's something that I've been working with for a couple of years now, and we're find, getting a lot of really good feedback, and I definitely encourage folks to consider that if you're interested in this topic and learning more. And with that, I want to open it up for question and answers, whether that's in the chat or if we're able to come off mute and just kind of continue the conversation here around feedback.
Thanks so much, Dan. If anyone wants to raise your hand, I can promote you. And you can also, you should be able to type in the chat. Here is a link to that certificate program that Dan was mentioning as well.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah. Any questions, any comments, anything I can go over again, anything at all? Always happy to continue that conversation here.
Great.
And if not, I'm just going to put my email and my LinkedIn there on the screen so folks have it. Again, if you want to continue the conversation, if you have things come up later, I'm always happy to engage and have a talk about this and work through that. So certainly feel free to reach out at any point.
May I ask one question?
Yeah, of course, please do.
Yeah, so as an instructor myself, I tend to give a lot of feedback and comments to students' assignment. But on the other hand, I see like students, they care more about the grade instead of the
Mm,
comments. They usually like most of the students, they don't read carefully about the comments. But I'm just like asking like, do you have any strategy to encourage students to check the feedback you provided so they are able to do better in their next submission or in the future, throughout the semester?
yeah, so that's a really good point. And I think sometimes this is sort of balancing and thinking about what's the best thing to do for sort of that ideal student that's going to read everything, but what are my students most likely to do? And sometimes they're not going to do what we wish they would do, and they're not going to read all those things. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, and trying to find that right balance point for I can say all these words, but if those words don't get read, is that helpful? Or is there a way I can say it with less or to give other, types of feedback? I think that's a good interesting thing to think about. In Brightspace, for instance, if you're using Brightspace, I think the overall comments is a really good spot. I think there's a lot of in-depth things we can get into with inline comments and things like that, but sometimes that overall comments, just by the nature of how it shows up in Brightspace, it's right next to the grade. So when students go to look for the grade, they're going to see that feedback that's right there. Um, we're limiting sort of the links and the things that we're asking our students to do to get to the feedback. I think that's an opportunity to provide some important level feedback and at least the key ideas and maybe direct them from there. I think that's an important thing. Sometimes the idea of allowing multiple submissions is a great way to make sure students are taking a peek at the feedback because if there's things that they can do to improve, they've got to read that and then they can improve and resubmit and they can earn more points. And students often, again, that's a good motivator sometimes, is that they can improve their grades and their scores, and that's a good way to get them to dive back into the feedback. I'm also a big fan of rubrics. Whenever we can use rubrics, I think sometimes just, clicking on the box that has the feedback sort of there. You got, 2 points here instead of four. And when they look and see that they got the two, they can see maybe what was there. Now we can always add to that and make it more specific, but the idea of a rubric, helps to provide a little more information and context as well, and has some of that sort of pre-made feedback, if you will, right? Where they're falling in these different categories. It helps make our job a little bit easier in providing that feedback, but also I think helps the students, in reviewing that feedback a little more streamlined as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I use rubric a lot, like for every
Mhm.
single assignment. But do you think like it is good enough to have like a rubric gradings or rubric feedbacks instead of like the written textual feedbacks after the rubric grading.
Yeah, I think rubrics is sort of the gold standard. I think that's what we want to make sure that we're using. I think rubrics do a really good job of helping prepare students and sort of set clear expectations for what we want to see out of that assignment. It gives them a chance to sort of self-reflect and self-evaluate before they submit. But it also keeps sort of ourselves and our students sort of again that idea of accountable and developmental with our feedback. We're grading more likely sort of in unison with this and keeping things consistent. We're going to sort of remove some of that bias that is inherently there when we're grading. And when we're using that rubric, we're keeping it, more in line, and then students can see again where they're getting points taken away, where they're missing out. I think that's always really helpful. So use the rubrics. I think the opportunity to add some additional context or comments, though, in that overall comments area. Again, whether it's in Brightspace or we're handing something back to a student in a face-to-face classroom, or any other, LMS, that's generally an opportunity that, here's the rubric. We can get really specific here, but here's sort of that overall feedback. Maybe that's the most important thing that you want the student to take from your feedback.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah, of
the feedback.
course. Good questions, good concepts and ideas here. What else might we have?
Not seeing other questions or hands raised, so I'm going to go ahead and put up our closing slide.
So, to wrap up, like I just want to say thank you, Dan, and thank you to all attendees for the attention and participation in today's webinar. There was a quick review of tomorrow's session, which is on the slide, and more details can be found on the National Distance Learning Week website. So recordings will also be posted on the website as well. National Distance Learning Week is sponsored by USDLA, who also hosts additional events this week. Check them out on the event website. We hope to see you at another session this week. So thank you, Erin, for sharing all the links